Okay, we're on. I love that little countdown. Sorry we're a little bit late if you were waiting to join us. I rushed back from a kinder drop-off. Real life stuff has to happen before you get started. But good morning to everybody who's tuned in. Really looking forward to having you all have a listen to what's going to be a really interesting conversation with KingPunkApe. She can tell us all about that if she wants in a bit. But welcome, King. Maybe for people who don't know you, before we sort of dive into what we're going to talk about, do you want to introduce yourself, who you are, where you come from, your story, how you got here?
Yeah, sure.
Thanks for joining us too.
Thanks, Brett. And for those who don't know, the interesting thing is Brett and I are actually in the same city, which is rare because most of the people I interact with online are obviously all over the world. It's one of the wonderful things. So it's kind of different actually to both be in the same city. So a little bit about myself. Look, my journey into ordinals, I guess, started on ETH. But unlike most people on ETH at the time, I was working on chain. I had a collection called Punk Ape Yacht Club, and it was kind of a mishmash of both punks and apes. And at that time, I was kind of riffing off the fact that we couldn't move the ETH sector away from their obsession with punks and apes. And also, I think at that time, punks weren't even on chain. So I just wanted to kind of make that sort of statement. It was my name comes from that collection, KingPunkApe, and it was always meant to be a bit of a tongue-in-cheek sort of name. But it just kind of stuck from there. But, I was working on chain, and I think I saw one of the first videos Casey did on ordinals, and he talked about, ordinals all going to be on chain. And straight away I was like, oh, and they were on Bitcoin. And straight away I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. This is what we need. So I was very ordinal curious from the very beginning. At that time, to inscribe ordinals was still not very user-friendly. Most of the people inscribing were long-time Bitcoin devs, people who had access to a Bitcoin node. It was not very accessible for most sort of people. But I landed up getting involved with a group called Generative, who've sort of iterated away from what they were doing, but quite a few of the Bitcoin artists that we know now who've been around for a long time came from Generative. But they actually allowed artists to be able to inscribe their work. And in fact, they even allowed people to use their MetaMask ETH wallet to inscribe, which is pretty phenomenal at that time. And I wish we'd kind of pursued that because I think we would have had more ETH people coming across. It definitely was. And I launched Babbies, which was the first large-scale collection to be inscribed by their community. Because as an artist, I didn't have the money to do it. At that time, to inscribe was $30, $40. The Babbies were free. They were all under a kilobyte, so essentially it wasn't a lot to kind of inscribe them. But it was, was this kind of very big, in my mind, revolutionary moment because we landed up onboarding a whole lot of people into ordinals. I mean, thousands of people. And it could have been a 10,000 collection in hindsight because we actually landed up inscribing over 10,000 attempts to inscribe them were made, and we had to refund all this money. It was chaotic. But that really was my baptism of fire, along with my whole community into ordinals. And most of that community is still very active here. Incredibly cornerstone people to build up, ordinals. So incredibly kind of proud of the Babbies community that way. Ordinals wasn't a thing, and so many people just kind of jumped out, the plane with me. And then, I guess ordinals has really evolved from then. Obviously Babbies, parent-child didn't exist, delegates didn't exist, recursion didn't exist. So, all those things have sort of evolved. But the thing, as I've stayed longer in Bitcoin, the thing that has really kind of occurred to me and is now part of A.B.B.F and from the Royals, is, that a whole idea that Bitcoin data is this beautiful way for us to create art on Bitcoin. And it's something so unique to ordinals as an art form. I don't think we think about what we're doing here in artistic frame enough. And by that I mean is we really are creating this whole new era of art. It has its own aesthetic, it has its own way it's created. And it's really about pushing art that way that fundamentally is really interesting to me. And I also have explored that through the profile picture, which is a little bit counterintuitive to most artists. Um, and the reason I've done that is I think PFPs are also part of this new evolution of art. I mean, prior to the punks, the idea of a profile picture art collection just didn't exist. The most close thing you probably had to it was, Andy Warhol and his work, where you take something and you iterate it in 100 ways and people have access to it. But it is fascinating. And with the Royals, artistically, what I try to do was keep it very close to what the punks did, which I think is underestimated by so many people as for its art. And by that I mean a lot of people go, oh, it's pixels, I could do that. But if you look at the punks, just one pixel changes a whole punk, and it's another punk. And the beauty of DMT with the Royals, and I'll explain a little bit about DMT because it kind of brings us to ABBF. But, my thing with the Royals, I was like, I want to make the tiniest change on a Royal and make it a completely new Royal. And what DMT does, and I know it's a very misunderstood part of the ecosystem, and part of that, kind of falls on the responsibility of creators like myself to educate people.
Mm-hmm.
Essentially, what it is, it's looking at Bitcoin in two layers, Bitcoin data in two layers. So the first layer is something called elements, which is, we have all the possible block heights, or all the block heights that have been mined to date. And what we do is you go back and you look at something called the bits field, but it can be any field. And what you do is you say, I want to find all the block numbers out there which have, and you look for a pattern. In our case, it was CC in their bits field, but you can look at it in a number of fields, and you land up, when you're looking at the bits field, you land up with blocks of 2016, block numbers that have CC in a block number. And that assigns the block heights that that pattern connects with become the block heights that you use to create traits. So that's your first. It's kind of like Bitcoin data exists in substrates, and
Yeah.
DMT like goes right down to the base layers and says, find me all the block heights with these patterns in it. And then you surface the block heights that have that. And then you use those block heights to assign traits. And, my fascination is, well, this is like you start having to think mathematically, you start having to think artistically, you start having to be very creative about how you build up an art collection that doesn't look repetitive, because the difference in art is just one number and can be one color. And then how do you build layers of traits onto that? So for me, exploring DMT really opened the door for me about what we can do with Bitcoin data. And then, ABBF is a further exploration of that. Um, and I do think there is something in us creating things that are unique to the medium we're working on, which is Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's going to become a stronger part of the narrative maybe not tomorrow, but over time. So, I'm here to play the long game.
Yeah.
And Bitcoin, I think we've all learnt, is not a, it's not really a, it's not really an ecosystem that sits with flipping very well. And that's worked in its favor and it's worked against because, we've seen attention run to Solana. But ultimately, Bitcoin is entrenched in, you know, beyond just crypto culture. Everyone understands what Bitcoin is these days. Um, most people look at the price of Bitcoin. It's entered mainstream conversations. Entered mainstream politics in America and has in other countries too. So, it is this sort of spectacle. So I don't even know if I answered your question introducing who I am. I'm just a nerd obsessed with Bitcoin.
I love
An
that.
artist obsessed with Bitcoin.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think that's no, wove quite an interesting narrative. We're definitely going to pick it apart. Like I want to sort of unpack it with you. Let's rewind back to you starting on ETH, and you said
Yeah.
you said you started on chain, which is it's still quite a niche even on ETH. So
Yes.
how did you get into that, and what drew you to it being on chain rather than dabbling with obviously it is what it is, like IPFS pointers in terms of like
Yeah,
NFTs
sure.
in this sort of like most common sense, even though there is this fully on chain community and it's very rich and strong, and a lot of them, well, some of them have come across to Bitcoin. But let's rewind back to there. Why on chain, and like when you got into it, and then how did you get into it? How did you end up there?
Yeah, well, look, I think fundamentally what NFTs did was something very important to artists. And we try to with NFTs we try to create it about clubs and values and perks, and like, to be honest, it almost is the reason it collapsed on itself because that was all artificial.
Mm-hmm.
Fundamentally what NFTs did was gave digital artists a way to assign ownership to their art. And we all joke about right click and save.
Yeah.
NFTs literally changed that because someone actually owned the original, and it didn't matter if thousands other copies existed. So to me, that was like, wow, this really changes digital art as a way for it to be traded. And it was kind of a little bit devalued, I think, by the art world for that reason. Someone else can own the file, which is the original. There was no way to ever tell the difference. So, NFTs was always my fascination. It wasn't about, "Ooh, own this NFT and get access to some, dumb party on a boat." Like, it was just like that. Look, honestly, that's just, it's almost like we forgot what the revolution was about and
Mm-hmm.
focused elsewhere. But for me, that was it. Yeah. So I think when I realized that and I realized what my conviction was,
Mm-hmm.
there was IPF was not an alternative. It had to be on chain. And then the other thing I think that is a theme with all the work that I've done is sometimes these restrictions kind of force you to be creative. Like, working with ETH on chain at the time was much more restrictive than it is now. I mean, you
Okay.
really had to work in pixels. You really had to. Yeah, I don't even think P5JS was really on chain. That hasn't even evolved. So you had to go back to really simple kind of pixel art. And I wasn't doing code art at that time. Now I pretty much fundamentally only work with code.
Mm-hmm.
That's been a journey for me, but that was how it did. And for me, that was the beauty of on chain. I have thought about going back to do work on ETH on chain because it is still an evolving market. Um, but I did find it really hard. And I know there's a lot of people in my community who were part of that early ETH on chain movement. And we were really early. It was like speaking to a brick wall. Like no one cared about it at all. There's been a real evolution in that now, and people do care, particularly as so many older collections had link rot, and even people might not realize it, but IPFS infrastructure, even in the last 6 months, has become completely unstable because even people who set up that infrastructure have kind of abandoned it. So it's completely ineffective. So to me, on chain, if it's not on chain, we used to say, um, you know, on chain or go home, and it kind of evolved into the statement Ugo we had, but in our community. But
Yeah.
I think, yeah, I think that is the beauty of on chain for me, that it's here, and whoever buys that piece of art knows that that is always going to exist, and that's a really important factor for art collectors. I
Yeah.
mean, I wouldn't buy something I thought wasn't going to be around, possibly, or relied on a founder. Like, we've got to create art that doesn't rely on any artificial mechanics, including promises that founders make. The art we create has to have value in itself for what it is. I really believe that. And if you're not doing that as an artist, I would question if you're really creating art, or you're creating, what are you creating? You're creating a promise. It's not the same thing.
Mm. Yeah, it's a really interesting way to phrase it. It's interesting, I guess, in the end, to each their own. But yeah, I think, like you said, and I think it'll lead to what you did with Royals, and obviously leading into A.B.B.F. That's really been like the key thing. But before we do that, so ordinals became a thing. What attracted you to it, apart from all the obvious probably reasons? And then, how did you have babbies up your sleeve? Was that something you'd been working on, and then it just was going to fit, or were they created at that time?
Um,
What was that little
Look,
evolution like?
oh, yeah. So I always have at least 3 or 4 projects I'm tinkering on in the background. Most of
Yeah.
them don't see the light of day, but I find it, my favorite thing to do is to be working on art. And
Hmm.
sometimes in this space, and I think we've spoken about this before, you actually spend less time doing that than you do the other stuff, all the other things. So that is how I maintain my interest on a personal level. I'm always tinkering, always tinkering. So I think Babby's art had been something I was tinkering with. And I think, the reason that I started tinkering with them is when I created Punk AUIC, they all were your traditional PFP. And at that time, there was a lot of talk of, the metaverse and everything. And that meant creating bodies for all the art I had as a PFP. And actually, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of
Yeah.
work. You got to think about movement. So I was always like, what is a small, concise little way you could create a body that could work as a PFP, so it could work as art, on Twitter. And that's the other thing I love about PFPs. It's honestly the most visible art in the ecosystem because everyone uses it on Twitter. It's seen,
Yeah.
it's enjoyed by people. So the idea was like, what's something I could make that's a body? So I had some kind of little plays of a body, on my iPad somewhere. And then I saw that video by Casey, and I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I was just like, no, I need to get, so I needed to keep Babbies little.
Yeah.
So they're tiny. They don't have a background. They don't have a background color. Originally, I did create the R2, but it actually landed up bloating the ordinals, and I couldn't get them under 1 kilobyte. But what I love is other people did the same thing. Like, Node monkeys also don't have any background. But now with recursion, it kind of frees the babbies up into um, art that can be put in any other recursive, art, which is what I did with Art for the People, which is a
Yeah.
full recursive collection. So I really love that about Babbies. And I think that's something a little bit underexplored in the community right now. But yeah, so Babbies art existed. It just made sense. And I was like, no, I need to be here with, I want to build something on Bitcoin. I nearly launched, and I regret not doing it. I nearly launched a collection prior to Babby's, just a small 100 collection of very, very unique one-on-one art. But I got nervous about doing it. And in terms of, like, I was like, I just don't know if there's a demand for this. People are going to want a big collection. Um, and like I said, inscribing at that time was expensive.
Mhm.
But yeah, Babby's just, I basically put a link up and said, you guys, everyone come do this. And we could only mint one at a time originally. And so the mint was going slowly. And then something was changed in the back end without my knowledge, which meant that you could mint as many as you wanted. I think one person minted like a phenomenal amount, like 800. And that kind of created an issue because when you've got like a big holder like that, your floor is always underwritten,
Yeah.
and they were free. Um, which was why I was so when I launched the Royals, I was determined to make sure that we had control over that, and then we got wide distribution. But yeah, so yeah, it was really ETH and the jump from ETH on chain to ordinals was like a no-brainer for me. And even as tough as things are right now on ordinals, I have long-term genuine conviction
Mhm.
that this is going to be something um, of significance. I'm not going to say value because I'm not promising anyone money, of significance to art history in the future. I really believe that.
Yeah, well, exactly. That's why we do what we do at Gamma as well, and support the arts and artists. It's interesting. I just want to touch on it because I know you and I have spoken about it in person, and you sort of alluded to it on a space. You talked about how much work goes into it, yet and I know Babbies were free, so this is almost like counter to what
Yeah.
I'm saying, but like art, it's your work. You should be paid for your work. And I
Yes.
know a lot of people want there's a lot of this like things should be free or like I just curious if you want to like touch on that because I know that
Yeah,
even
sure.
with A.B.B.F people have said how are you going to do this, how are you going to make it is it going to cost, and like well of course it should because of the amount of actual time that goes into it that people aren't aware of.
Yeah, look, it's more than time.
Time,
It's
effort,
also
energy,
knowledge.
blood, sweat, tears, and
Yeah.
all of your history. I know I wasn't trying to
Yeah. Oh
take
no,
away
no,
from
I
this
know
thing.
you're
Yeah,
not. I'm just look.
yeah,
It's more than time. It's like
mm,
you build up an expertise in an area. You're constantly thinking about your community, about what you can give back. And what I can give back is I'm an artist. I'm an artist that can probably create things a lot of other artists can't because there is a whole lot of knowledge and ordinals. I mean, one of the things holding us back is there's almost no way for artists to educate themselves unless they're in it, doing it, spending time in it. Like, there's no even articles out there about Bitcoin art. Do you know that? Like, I went looking for some the other day. No one started writing about it. Um, so what was your question, Brett?
just talking about the. That's it. You obviously we don't want to
Oh,
say it's
about
going
free.
to.
Yeah, look, babbies were free, and they were free
Yeah,
because there was no demand for ordinals. And my intention was I wanted my community to have access to the opportunity I thought was before us. And I they were free because there was no demand. No one was like, oh my God, where's the next big mint? I mean, we minted under 500,000, like we're under the first million. Like there was nothing existed. We were before frogs. Um, but I was just an independent artist doing this for my community. I wasn't someone who had money, who had like at that time, it was costing people like in excess of 100,000 to inscribe a collection and then flog it off for, 7 times that to people. I didn't have that money, but I really believed in what ordinals was, and I was excited for that. And the way I could build access to it for myself as well as my community was through that collection. So I don't regret babies being free. But, I have been here in this space a long time. I haven't gone anywhere. I try with all my collections to embed value in it that is beyond me or anything I promise, that it's got value for what it represents. And Babby's is an early collection. The Royals, I believe, is the deepest DMT kind of collection that exists in terms of variety of traits. The art is unique. It's got wide distribution. I think it's a really strong example of DMT, and not throwing shade at Nat Cats at all. I love Nat Cats, and the Royals wouldn't have existed without Nat Cats. I love what Evie did. But my approach was as an artist. I'm like, what can I as an artist bring to DMT? So so yeah.
Yeah, and
Um
then tell us, just on that note, it's a little bit tangential, but on topic. For someone who has like they've seen the Royals and they've seen the expression or the acronym DMT, and they really have no idea what it is, how would you simplify it for people to understand? Because it's a little bit different.
yes. Yeah, so digital matter theory is just
I'll just interrupt you. Base chain LFG, of course, and also Matonio, I believe it was, or Matono. I'm not sure how to pronounce
that's
it.
Matt. Oh no. I
Matt,
need to
oh
learn that.
no, LFG as well, of course. Sorry, now go back to it. But lots of
Yeah, so
LFG for King Punk.
so DMT, look, essentially it's not that far removed from what we've seen in a lot of the movement, which is we're seeing a lot of art tied to Bitcoin data.
Yeah.
DMT allows access to more Bitcoin data than just your DMT, just your Bitcoin endpoints. And so I know that's staying still a little bit technical, but fundamentally it is just access to deep Bitcoin data that
Mhm.
people can incorporate in their art. Um, and you can build DMT a number of ways, but the way I built the Royals is every number in the block heights, so say 38304, every one of those digits assigns a trait to uh, a PFP. So if you think of the way an ordinary PFP collection is created, an artist will come up with a set of traits like 80 hairstyles, 70 bodies, and randomly they generate that based on percentages, and you get an output of art. So that's traditionally how every PFP has been kind of created to date. DMT doesn't do that. What it does, it said, well, instead of assigning this hairstyle randomly, I'm going to assign it based on a number and a pattern in a number. And so you land up using data in a way that hasn't been done before. And it's very challenging creatively because you kind of working within this set maths, but you've got to think about it really differently. So it's a different way of doing art. I think it brings something to the ecosystem. If you own a royal, you literally own a digital face of the Bitcoin data behind it, and that's kind of very cool. And it's incredibly challenging to create with the tools that we have around it, which I think has held DMT back. And I've spoken about this before, but I am working with someone within my community, the Royals, and we are creating a platform to make DMT more accessible to more artists. And we're doing something quite radical with that. But I do think uh, there will be demand for DMT when more people understand what it is. Um, and I'm not an overly technical person, um, and I don't think that should just be the sell of a collection. Often collections really lean into that. It's got to be like, to me, it's got to have it's got to be aesthetic, it's got to be artistic, it's got to look like, those are just my own standards around those things. But yeah, that's essentially DMT is access to more Bitcoin data than current endpoints.
And so I'm learning something here because I understand how, for example, inflatables today, you know, referencing libraries and
Yeah.
whatnot, and there's other collections. Where is the artwork being, I don't know, for lack of a better expression, almost like drawn from or pulled from, or like what's the source to then create, like when there's a one, it creates a yellow crown or
Yeah,
something
so
like
you
that.
get all the art code is on chain, and this is important,
So
I think.
it's referencing is there a library that, or is it one of the, yeah, talk to us more about that.
Well, yes. Well, so Royals are built in P5JS. I think they're
Okay.
the only P5JS collection. So it references, I use LIFO's P5JS library.
Hats off, LIFO, is it, or LIFO? I don't know how to pronounce it. He's never told me.
I don't
LIFO
know.
or LIFO? LIFO, FIFO, or LIFO, FIFO, but absolute goat. Shout out. Anyway, yeah.
Yeah, and always been incredibly helpful to me in the background. There's a few people who have, at the moment, Ordinals relies on those relationships you have with those other artists to kind of really build your knowledge around it. But yeah, so it's P5JS. It is fully on-chain. People have this argument that because they have JSON data in their wallet, it's not fully on-chain. That's a complete misunderstanding.
Yeah.
Recursives didn't work until Magic Eden updated their the way they displayed. Delegates still don't display on audio. It's all the way that people are how they decided to process that data. It is still on chain. However, because it's become such a consistent kind of pushback for DMT, what we're doing with the new gallery is we're actually solving that as a problem. But yeah, it is fully on chain. The JSON, just like in a delegate, points to the art and can be rendered fully on chain.
Well, it's funny that
So
you say that. It's funny that you say that because obviously all delegates, all editions, they're derived in code that point back to the original that
yes,
allow it
it's
to render and
exactly the
display as.
same
So
thing.
it doesn't really matter like what everything we look at is ones and zeros anyway on the screen. So yeah, it's not.
Yeah,
It shouldn't really be an argument. But yeah, it's a pity that maybe there's like a misnomer or
look,
perhaps the wrong people are
sometimes
feeding it. I'm not sure.
I think some of it is fundamentally, a lot of people don't understand the complexities of things, and they hear something and they don't have the knowledge to push back on it, and that is totally fine. Like we're in
Yeah,
such
yeah,
a
of course.
new space. But I like, on chain is my thing. It's always been my thing. I wouldn't have created a collection that wasn't fully on chain. So the other thing about DMT that is also misunderstood, and I think this is important. I fully believe that parent-child is the way to go going forward. I agree. One of the things with ordinals that is unfortunate is art is all on chain, but metadata isn't. So there's no way to pull in a collection. Um, so I think parent-child is incredibly important. But DMT itself actually solves this at some level because it only validates one royal for one block height can become valid. So in some way, that is working the same way as parent-child invalidating something as part of a collection. What it doesn't do is you can't pull it into something like Magic Eden, and you've still got to do that physically. So with the new gallery, we're actually building parent-child and DMT into it, so it's like double validated.
Yeah.
But DMT itself actually, before parent-child was a massive narrative, was doing that anyway. It validates an art as part of a collection in a beautifully elegant way. And it's a very elegant way of creating art in the same way that delegates are. It's small files. DMT is an incredibly powerful tool in artists and creators' belt. And I'm hoping we can really get more interest in it. But as a collector, I think it's really unique. And there are very few early DMT collections, who got, there's Nat Cats is great. The other one
Yeah.
I love is Unat Peppy. Great team, small team behind it. Obviously, really kind of get it. DMT Chaos is beautiful artwork that kind of exists and kind of created. There's very few, and I do think it is a narrative that is going to take some time for people to understand. But I do think, in terms of collectible value, those those few DMT collections that kind of stand out to me are definitely things that I own, and I own with conviction. I think there is, something in them. But people who love and collect the royals and kind of wear their PFP as their PFP, when I see them, I know they're people who, like, to me, the signal is I really believe in art and Bitcoin art. Like, this is something different, and this is what I truly believe in. And it. And then I have other collectors who just really love the art, and neither of
which
those is wrong
is
or right.
which is super important actually. I'm a big proponent of buy it if you like it. So let's talk about I've just had a complete mental blank. Oh, art for the
Atomic
people.
Fit-
Art for the people.
Oh,
And
art for the
then
people.
we're finally going to get to the grand show, if you like, even though all of them are as important as the other. But art for the people. And I think this probably, I don't want to put words in your mouth, links almost across to like your ETH kind of poke at like the yacht club punk sort of, and even
Yeah.
your name KingPunkApe. You've clearly got like a penchant for like being a little bit playful, poking a little bit of fun, obviously keeping it artistic, but still almost like maybe it's like a little bit of a poke, a bit of a societal commentary on like just the whole space and taking it, being memey but being intentional in like, if that
Oh
all
yeah.
makes
Oh
sense. Yeah,
definitely. Like I love all these things about our culture. Like I'm
yeah,
fascinated by the formation of cultures and memes and our own language, and it's it's all these things kind of build up something very unique and kind of if you zoom out, we all belong to different communities within this one culture, and it's such a clash of intention, and people are all here for the wrong things. And I think sometimes I've heard artists complain about no one wants art here and blah blah blah, and like, I feel so ignored and I've been here, and sometimes I used to find myself buying into those kind of complaints. But I think in order to exist and survive here, you've kind of got to embrace that, and you've kind of got to roll with it, and you've kind of got to have fun in the moment we're in right now. And you just can't you can't so when it's not really poking fun, it's more like,
yeah,
let's just fucking embrace this. And if you look after the people, you know Bitcoin is the recursion is absolutely fundamental to the future of Bitcoin art. It really changed the game. It opened up so many things. But it also does this thing where you can use other art and other code, and you're almost invited to on Bitcoin. If anyone thinks you shouldn't be doing that, I fundamentally disagree with you, because
it's a public ledger, isn't it?
it's a public ledger, but also ownership is cannot be disputed. Who inscribed that is not. It's almost like, yes, you own the right to that art, but someone else can use it to reproduce or recreate something new. But ownership and attribution is always tied to you,
Yeah,
and
well, the
and you
proof
can't
is on
find that
chain.
anywhere.
Yeah,
Yes, and so that's really, really, like, to me, that's really, like, to use. It's fucking profound. Like, let's use it. And so, after the people, like, if you go back and look at early ordinals, like I did, it's so funny because you obviously see these people like, oh, fuck, I've got to inscribe something. What do I grab around me to put on chain? And so, some of the early, you see this kind of like these different sort of things. Like, some people are grabbing pictures of their dog. Other people are putting up photos from anything. It's so random. It's so random, but there's also this kind of theme of excitement and funny and humorous.
I think that's
And
what I meant by
you know,
poking
it
fun. I
really,
wasn't. Yeah.
yeah. So after the people was like taking that and being like, yeah, this is, this is art for the people is about taking those early inscriptions and re-looking at them through kind of like a a mishmash. Like it's meant to kind of look like extreme pop art that doesn't look like art, but it is. Like they're meant to be messy. They're not meant to make sense. They kind of like, almost counter art, but they are art. Um, and I genuinely loved exploring those early ordinals to create it. I learned a lot in doing that, and I just wanted to share that with people. But I do think, yeah, it is something that I think we're going to see more art of in the future, kind of using other work around it. I think that's something that is yet to be explored, and I'd love to see someone really explore that. And I have a couple of projects where I play around with this a little bit, just on the back end to see what you could do with it. And I could master if I did after the people now. I would I could have made it more sophisticated than what it was, but it is what it is, and I really enjoy it as a collection. Um, and it's kind of strange because the way I had to create it, I almost didn't visually see most of them until they were minted because there was no way to really do that at the time.
Mm.
So I still is a collection that I kind of feel like as much a collector as I do the artist in a way.
And that's fun. Yeah. What do you? It's not a question well, it's a question that I've asked before, but it doesn't come up that often. Yeah. How do you feel when do you collect your own art, or do you hold your own art as as an artist, or is it like you just said, sometimes it depends?
Well, art for the people, definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, the others, I own all my art. Everyone knows I'm always like, often I will talk about my favorite kind of traits, like, in Punk Apes, I loved the kind of crazy red hair, and everyone, whenever there was one on the floor, people would tell me. Um, with Babbies, I love the little monkey. The monkey or the glitch is very popular. I love the glitch as well. Um, Alex, one of the people in my community, owns like my favorite Babbies, and it's a glitch. But I love the monkeys, so there's always, and so I collect them.
Yeah.
Royals. Oh yeah, I love the Peppies, and that one was kind of controversial when first people saw the Peppies. They're like, "Oh my god, what are these?" But I love the Peppies, and they've become very popular. So I collect them. But yeah, you do, because when you create such a large collection, you land up seeing a lot of the art you're going to create through the process of testing and everything, but you don't often get to look at it, take a step back and look at it until it's kind of out there. So still I see royals I haven't seen before, and it's also really fun, um, looking at it with your community, like with the royals. Within the community, people started to love what we called the ghost trait, and that's not an official trait. It's where the background is the same color as the face. So you just get the outline. And people love the ghosts. And I did too. In fact, my PFP on Twitter it's essentially a ghost trait. And it's also just a two-color one, which is very unusual as well. Um, so, all those sort of things you start to discover with people that you don't always see. Um, but yeah, I mean, that's always fun. It's one of the most fun things I think about creating larger gen art collections is you get to re-experience your art with other people as everyone discovers new and different things. That's certainly something I love doing.
Yeah. And
And
that
you
would be
only really get to do with, yeah, long form.
for sure. And that would be quite invigorating as an artist when people are noticing things or perhaps bringing things up that you're like, oh, hey, actually, yeah, I didn't call that a trade, or this wasn't something that I'd necessarily thought of in that way, and then it like I guess like opens your eyes to more of what you created as well. So talk to us about the atomic Bitcoin butt flowers. We're excited that it'll be on Gamma. I'm stoked to
Yes.
work with you. Really excited about that. But yeah, where did this idea come from? This is very unique. You spoke about it on the Art on Bitcoin space a couple of weeks ago now about the Bitcoin enthusiasm. Is it called the Bitcoin Enthusiasm Index? But start from the start. We've obviously had all of this experience that's led up to perhaps the creation of this
A.B.B.F.
collection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So A.B.B.F. Look, it started well over a year ago, where I've I've got a few collections I've kind of keep coming back to, and this was one of them. When I say I have art that I keep coming back to, this was one of them. And often that's when I find myself keep coming back to something, I'm like, okay, maybe there's something here. And originally the idea was I wanted to create something that was kind of dynamic and whose reaction who reacted to the price of Bitcoin. And and I wanted to explore this for a number of reasons. One is like I do think the price of Bitcoin has become this like big cultural phenomenon. Like we all watch it, not even us who in the space, not even people who own Bitcoin. It's like, it's become this new sort of thing that people, so it's kind of like a spectacle. But obviously, I think at the time I was looking at it, you could still link to off-chain data, and I was like, kind of means that the data it points to will be off-chain, and I wanted to do it, but I was like, I don't know, given my whole belief in on-chain, that that's really going to fly with me. Um, there weren't as many endpoints for Bitcoin data as that there are now, and for people who don't know, it's probably worth explaining.
Yeah, I was going to
In
say,
order, yeah,
talk
yeah,
about,
in order
just for the
to
people who don't know, what's an
endpoint.
endpoint? Yeah.
Yeah, so an endpoint basically is a way for you to reference Bitcoin data or
Hmm.
ordinals data. And there's not many endpoints. There's not a lot. But basically what it ensures is that anything you point to as an ordinal has to be on chain or your ordinals will not work. They will be kaput. And in fact, there's some early ordinals that are just broken now because
Yeah.
of it. Kaput. So had I done that, that would have been where we are. But anyway, I had that hesitation, and then we started to see this. I did the royals, and like I I didn't make them dynamic, and I didn't make them give them movement. There's one animated trait. And the reason I didn't was because of the display thing. Like, I really believe like art needs to be easily displayed anywhere, or we're going to run into issues. It just becomes art that can only exist in certain spaces. So I want my art to be able to be shared anywhere. Um, I lost my train of thought. A.B.B.F. Oh yeah, so
Yeah.
I did want to. I really loved Cybersea's Duke's Ex Machina.
Yeah.
Fantastic work, and it's kind of funny because you'll end up realizing that there's a whole lot of artists who start kind of exploring similar things in similar ways. And in fact, I was talking to Vivid Gallery. They told me about inflatables before they released it. I was talking to them and I was like, you guys, this is so similar to what I'm doing with A.B.B.F. So I knew they were coming too. So you all start having these kind of similar ideas. But my idea for A.B.B.F is quite simple. I wanted to express the emotion and the enthusiasm around Bitcoin. And the default for all of us is probably price. Like price probably represents that. But actually, maybe that's not quite accurate, because if you think of the lifetime of Bitcoin back to like from the beginning to where we expect it to go, we can expect, enthusiasm to keep kind of growing as more are mined out, as all of these sorts of things. And so I wanted, what I landed up doing was creating an algorithm that points to, it uses endpoints. So it doesn't just point to an endpoint. It doesn't just say point to mining difficulty and pull that in.
Hmm.
What it does is it takes mining difficulty, it times that by the miner's fees. It looks at how many bitcoins are yet to be still mined. It's like a whole little algorithm in itself, and it spits out a score and says, okay, this is where enthusiasm is right now. And it's designed not to fluctuate hugely in a day, but over time, it will eventually go up, assuming all these, assuming miners keep paying more and everything.
Yeah.
Um, so it's meant to exist forever, and it's meant to, in our lifetime, I'd say three or four traits will unlock. As the Bitcoin score goes up, like if you look at my profile right now, it's got laser eyes. You only get laser eyes when the Bitcoin score is over 60 or between 60 and 65. And then I think it starts to smoke a cigar when it goes up. And like it does all these different, they're all animated traits as well.
Yeah.
And, it's meant to capture that. The smile, however, the way if it's got a huge smile, you know that it's using another algorithm to kind of try and measure more short-term enthusiasm. So it'll have a massive grin if we're going up in big percentages. The grin will be smaller if is negative or goes down. So that's the more daily capture. And then the stalk also captures mining difficulty, I think. So, it's built to be this kind of long-term representation of Bitcoin. And, we've just had a big drop, but we've hovered around, 100,000. And enthusiasm is like between 60 and 65 most of the time, which is pretty high, but we know that over time it's probably going to get much, much higher. So I've had to build into the algorithm this idea that in the future it's going to keep going up and more is going to be kind of unlocked. Originally with A.B.B.F, I had each trait unlock on top of each other. And so by the end, you just had this like confetti coming from the ground. It's smoking a cigar. It's got laser eyes. It's puking dollar signs. It's got Bitcoin flashing in its mouth. But it landed up really detracting from the art. So now they just switch on and off at different things. And then there's a few Easter eggs in there. Like I've just created random numbers that if they come on, music starts playing, different words start appearing in its mouth. But it's also got that playful kind of degen culture, like,
Yeah.
it pukes dollars and it does all this kind of silly stuff. And then with the art itself, it's P5JS again. But the reason, for the flower over another character is it allows me to use the character in a more generative art style, which means like there's all these different variations of a petal and patterns in a petal that can exist. There's different backgrounds. It can be kind of more complex and also kind of explore the generative art side of it, which I think you can do more with the flower than, other characters. So yeah, that's, was the whole premise sort of behind it. And it's interesting. It's taken a year of kind of slow educating myself about how we can do this. Um, but but it's also, I did think about adding interaction to the art piece. Um, but I decided against it because I do want something about the butt flowers to be about this community observation. And as soon as you make art interactive, you make it a one-on-one kind of interaction. So I do want this to be about this, this whole spectacle of Bitcoin and what our enthusiasm around it is.
It's going to be a 10K collection, or unless that
Yes.
has changed, you can let us know.
No.
How do you, for a generative 10K, how do you talk to us about, like you said, it's been a year of work, but how do you plan for that? How do you, for a vast, that's a large number. How do you plan for it to be cohesive yet them be different? Like you said, there's the petals and there's different backgrounds, and it's a generative collection. Yeah, talk us through that process.
Oh yeah, look, it's a little bit harder with PFPs because you've got to build real. When you're doing abstract art, sometimes like the smallest change really changes a whole art. Like one trait can change a whole look, and yeah, with PFPs, you're kind of a little bit more constrained to a character. But look, I managed to. I think I've really spent the last 2 months really kind of finalizing the art and kind of pushing it. I think they've got a pretty unique look. You've always got to build in like your rare character, you know, what that is. So there's kind of two rare characters in the collection, but yeah, it's really just making sure you're looking at it constantly. We're also the child, the ID of the child inscription is the seed for the flower.
Mm-hmm.
And that's also an interesting kind of concept we're hearing more and more about. But really what that means is you don't run your algorithm off chain like, people run them like 100,000 times and then choose the 10,000 best that you want and then inscribe those, which is what a lot of artists do, and there's nothing wrong with that. But what you do when the idea of your child inscription becomes the seed for the art, what you're doing is you're literally relinquishing control of the output
Yeah.
to the blockchain. And so entirely randomly, your art will be created. So you have no idea what exists until you do it. And I love that. I love that as a concept. I think it's amazing. So you've got to make sure that, prior to you doing that, there's a lot of testing around. Sometimes you'll be using the same color for things, and then there's a chance you could land up with a very funky looking, buff flower. And so yeah, a lot of kind of testing. I think just having done work in PFPs for so long, one of the things that I think is misunderstood as an art form is how to build character into the traits you build. So, when you look at different royals, you'll get a sense of a different personality, and the same with babbies. And you've got to do that with A.B.B.F. Has been a little bit more challenging with the flower, but because it's about expression, um, building in differentiation around those sorts of things. So yeah, there are always things you've got to keep in mind. Um, but they're things I kind of really enjoy as a challenge of creating art, PFP art. Um, and yeah, A.B.B.F. also, it's P5JS, but I've also built a bit of recursion in terms of I am bringing in some of the idea like behind art for the people into it. And there's some traits that are like pointing to kind of like iconic things in the background, mostly for background traits. But yeah, I mean, it's always fun. The most work is often in the final weeks, like at the moment. We're also going to put all the traits on chain for A.B.B.F. Also, something that I think we've kind of let lag in ordinals a little bit, but I think metadata should be on chain. And one of the real reasons that hasn't been done a lot of time is there wasn't a lot of documentation around how to do it. But yeah, so A.B.B.F. will have parent child, and they'll also have all their data on chain.
And so talk us
But
through that, because that's a tricky process if there's that element of unpredictability due to the child inscription's ID that it's going
yeah.
to generate with the correct metadata.
Oh my God, it's like so
Yeah.
nerve-wracking. It's so nerve-wracking. And it's honestly, it's a thing that's kind of like the art is ready.
Yeah.
We're going to get them out there. I'm hoping in the next 3-4 weeks. But yeah, it's making sure that metadata is entirely accurate. And there's also a couple of ways you can do delegates. One is to actually get the metadata to point to the art and build them out that way. There's a couple of ways you can do it. And one of the ways is very elegant, neat way of doing it, but have to make sure your metadata is so accurate, and it's a lot of just testing, because there'll be the one trait you don't test, and there'll be the one that doesn't show. Like, I can't tell you how many times, as an artist, you think you've tested anything, and you hit refresh, and then something pops up that you hadn't accounted for. And so it's less of a thing with abstract art or art. When it comes to, PFP, you really have to get that right, or you'll land up with a really funky looking character.
Which might resonate with some people, so or perhaps not. But tell us about you more as an artist. I know that like the whole thread has been of that, but what is your taste? Like, what like these butt flowers? I love them. I think that they're cute and funny and funky, and they have character. Like you said, I think you summed it up really well about how they're very expressive. But yeah, I know that like when we had a coffee, as you mentioned earlier at the start, we're from the same city. We talked about it more from like a purely artistic sense. Can you like delve into that at all? Can
Oh,
you
what?
define it?
Yeah. Look, I don't. I think a lot of artists become obsessed with like building up their aesthetic or their style. That's not me, but
Mhm.
then I hear from my collectors like, oh, there's very clearly a king style in this. I guess I like, when it comes to character design anyway, like and PFP design, I like strong colors. I like clearness. I actually, if I if to me, if you line up a punk and a bored ape, punk to me artistically is a stronger collection, because I'm like, as a
I agree.
PFP, it's
Yeah.
it's so clear, it's simple, relies on strong color. It's there's certain elements like that I think are really fundamental to PFPs. Um, but so I think there is there. I think the thing that I haven't shared is, I've created a lot of art itself in my journey, and I've also kind of developed in creating all those collections, none of which I've released, is like a very strong idea around how I think a generative art collection should work, and my way of approaching it. And we've seen some evolution in that too. But I think after ABBF, I've all my work has been pointing towards exploring profile pictures as an art form. I think I'll really switch to art. And that's exciting to me, because, that's a whole new different thing for me to explore.
What can we
Um,
expect?
I I don't know. I've got one piece of work I've probably been tinkering away with. I'm not lying, 2 years. And I think there's that. There is something I think, I will release, in the near future, exploring things. I love there's a couple of ETH collections that I really love. Um, One of them is autoglyphs. I kind of feel like that's trying to be ripped off in by too many people in ways that it's kind of unimaginative. But
Yeah.
there is something about autoglyphs I really love about the algorithm behind it, which is, it's such a simple algorithm, and it the smallest change really changes the art in fundamental ways. And I've got an algorithm that I've developed that is similar in that kind of way. And I love that. I think that's something I'd like to kind of release next. But look, you never really know. The challenge to myself is to continually stay curious and keep pushing myself, and that's the most value I can give to my collectors, because I'm not that's what I am. I'm an artist, and so just keep doing that. And I've got an amazing community, and what they are fundamentally compared to other communities in my mind is incredibly mature collectors, and by that I mean is we've survived. A lot of my collectors have come with me from punk, from Punk AYC. Matt, is one of my moderators on Punk AYC. um just these people have really come along on this journey with me, and they've never, like, I've seen so many other artists and founders burn out by people saying why and when, and also as a founder I've learned to say no and like fuck off, like
Yeah,
in
yeah,
like for in person, but just like, look, the whole idea that we promise things in the beginning like we had to on ETH, like I've shifted so much fundamentally on that.
yeah,
um but I'm surrounded by, I know that my collectors, and I don't just think of them as my collectors. I'm incredibly proud of the people who, a lot of them are very big collectors of other collections too, belong to other communities, but fundamentally they're not people who are going to be asking those dumb where wine, where what, what are you doing for me questions. They get that their role is as much mine. Once they've collected it, they're part of a community and they're part of building the narrative around it as an owner of that sort of collection. So, I feel very privileged that way. And it is very hard for creators and builders in this space at times, that pressure that comes through, the fudding that happens, which it took me a long time to realize this isn't, a lot of it isn't personal. A lot of it is just part of the culture here, that's almost the thing that is done at times. And then you have to learn to value what is fun and what is genuine feedback. What is something you're going to take on and change? Like, I could get things wrong. I always discuss, some my ideas with as many people as I can. And, one of the people who I haven't mentioned who's been really fundamental to my journey in all of this is our community lead Fab. Um, he has been such a cornerstone for me in, like, if I've got an idea and I'm like, Fab, I'm thinking of doing this. What do you think? He'll always 100% back me, but he'll also say, I don't know, King, like this is what the thing, and like it's just so good to have that solid sounding board. There's other people in my community as well, but he's always been there, and he stepped up when I had to kind of log off for about 6 months because of some health issues, and he said to me, "We've got the best community. We can't let this go. Send me the login, and I will keep it going." And he has, and he's never kind of faded on that. So yeah, I feel very lucky about that. But it's certainly, you certainly have to have some resilience as a creator and builder here.
yeah. I couldn't agree more. And obviously have both sides of the coin, working at Gamma as a
Yes.
platform, but then having my own projects. And I'm hyper aware of that and working with artists and just providing that guidance for them as well, because there's just so much pressure. I saw Billy Resty post about it. I think you may have commented. I think somebody was like, "Oh, another collection, Billy," which is just insane to me. Like you create prolifically, and I think that's brilliant. You're an artist. That's what you do. You create art. Um, Clearly, you and I have the same opinion on this. But how do you explain it to people that, or how do you push back on that? They're like, "I'm going to keep creating. This is what I do."
Look, I think I've had to explain it less and less.
Yeah,
I
that's
also
good.
think the challenge for me is, look, if I was just still putting out pixel art, you know, I would say fair enough. That's a fair enough criticism, but I'm not. Like I'm like, where is the next narrative, and how do I give my collectors opportunity to access that?
Mm-hmm.
And I can do it. And we're still working, like I said in the beginning, ordinals itself to work in the realm of like ABBF and Cyber C and even Shaderism. Like there's very few, and like what BDV did with portraits. There's actually very few artists that have the skill set to do a lot of this work right now. Like, that is the honest truth. It is not an easily accessible medium at the moment. And if we all truly believe that this is a moment in history, no one's going to go, oh, look, King created XYZ, therefore they all have value. They have to have value in themselves. And so that's
Yeah.
a challenge for me. I'm not recreating something I did before. And I wouldn't do that. It's like, how do I create something entirely new that's working at the edge of what is happening in the space? How do I keep doing that? And how do I keep giving my collectors access to that innovation? And, like right now, what does it matter what the price of Babbies or Royals is right now? We've almost got no new collectors coming into the space, but they will come. There is no, in my mind, there's no doubt about that in the future. And that's a mindset we have to have. So if I believed I could create something that would have long-term value for the people who've supported me, I think I'd be doing them a disservice by not creating it. Like, I would be holding back access for them to do it. Um, you know, for them to own it. So I I don't think it's. I, I understand the question. I understand the hesitation, but I think my collectors understand that I I do know the space. I'm not recreating what I've done before, and I'm continually pushing it forward for all of us.
Just to summarize, of course, I'm completely on your team there. It's just an interesting thing that I think that, like you're saying, and I made a post about this the other day. I was at my mum's for for lunch or whatever the other week on the weekend, and she pulled out. You and I are both from the same city, so we're talking about footy, Australian football, but back then it was called the VFL, which is the state we live in. She pulled out this card collection, and the card collection, she didn't even realize she'd written her name and she'd put the year. So it was from 1975. And I was like, Mum, do you know these cards are 50 years old this year? And to think about a collectible, or to think about the work, and butt flowers are a great example of this, because they're still going to be dynamic. They're still going to be evolving and
Yeah.
changing. In 50 years, I think that sort of time horizon is still such a hard thing to grasp for so many people. Even for myself, even for my mum, she's like, oh my God, these are 50. Like, that's amazing. And I was like, they're probably worth something. She's like, I don't even care. I'm just going to pass them down to you guys. Like, for her, they are just like a true heirloom or collectible. And I love that mindset, or that frame of mind. And I think that the butt flowers and the other work, and and work by other artists on Bitcoin and on chain on ETH most likely, but on Bitcoin we know that it's going to exist in 50 years. And I think that people like that sort of time horizon is fair enough that people aren't thinking like that, but it's kind of a fascinating concept.
Yeah, which touches on another thing. Like, on chain is all well and good, but if it's on a chain that's not likely to exist, what does it matter? So I think
Well,
Bitcoin is,
Bitcoin, yeah.
yeah, Bitcoin is about as secure as you can get. But yeah, I just think, I think they're fair questions, but that's my response. I think about these things. I always bring my collectors along. I always give them access first. You know, Ordinals itself is in a bit of a death spiral right now, but like everyone else who's been around, I'm like, we know it comes back, guys. Like,
Yeah.
like, what does it matter? If anything, it's a signal to go shopping. So I've been grabbing a few things. I haven't been able to prior. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna collect some stuff now. Um, and yeah, it's just the space we play in. And
Well, when ordinals started, so to speak, when it went, like when Gamma and obviously then Magic Eden and other platforms went live, I think like Feb 2023. Bitcoin was at 15K and now it's at 88, but it's down from 105. And so like it's just funny how the market, like how the mentality is. Everyone's in this death spiral, but you're like, hold on a second. I know that no one wants to, but if you zoom out, maybe not your ordinal prices, but Bitcoin is way up and things are actually pretty good for the growth
They
of this
are.
space. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing about the Bitcoin enthusiasm score, because like I had a kind of have a guess at what it would kind of create, and it's calibrated to a particular point in time as well. That was the only way I could get it to kind of measure things in a way that makes sense. But quite often before we see Bitcoin kind of spike, I'll notice that the BES go up. I'm not suggesting people use it as an accurate indicator of anything, but
It's the
but it's
new
interesting.
it's the new Bitcoin analysis.
Yeah, well, it's
Why
interesting because
not?
well, it actually talks to there's something I don't if a lot of people might not be aware, but in financial markets itself, because of AI, you're getting a lot of like fundies now go back and look for what they're calling alternative data
Yeah.
inputs to to
Yeah.
to kind of figure out like what are indicators we hadn't thought about before that are now indicating like what stocks to invest in and stuff. And so you're getting this phenomenon happening outside of it, but kind of in Bitcoin, I think our endpoints are kind of those in itself. Like,
Yeah.
what are the lag indicators? What is the data no one's looking at, which actually shows, that enthusiasm for Bitcoin. You're right. Like in the long game, Bitcoin is still very high, and I expect it to, it might drop off for a little bit, but then it's going to rally again. And like that's just the game we're kind of in. I don't, the only people it probably matters to are day traders. And um, I made a decision very early on not to kind of get involved in that part of the space, because I don't have the time and, it's a distraction. But it also like, have we say it and it almost sounds like a bit of a trope, but like have conviction in something. Like eh, I have conviction in Bitcoin and I have conviction in art on Bitcoin, or Bitcoin art, which is the distinctions I make between art that's just on Bitcoin and art that uses Bitcoin data to inform its art. Um, have conviction. And yeah, Bart flowers are about, yeah, what's Bitcoin enthusiasm is actually pretty high right now. They cry, the Bart flowers cry if Bitcoin drops below 40.
Yeah, well, we don't want that. And if we do, I guess maybe it's a buy signal. So, not financial advice. But it's funny that you say that because he's from Sydney, actually. There's a Bitcoin technical analyst called Checkmate that I actually recommend people follow. Super interesting. May or may not be your thing. But I was going to say, I'll have to share with him A.B.B.F because I think he might find it quite funny as like you said, the fundamental sort of technical analyst sort of maybe looking for some of those alternative signals. He might it might speak to him, and people like that. But it is an interesting one because I know, like you said, with these endpoints, it's going to pull in bits of data and it's going to give you a bit of a representation of, like you said, of the Bitcoin enthusiasm at that point in time.
Yeah, yeah. Look, I'm not promising anyone it's anything other than it's an
Of course, I'm
interesting
being a
use
little,
of
yeah.
Bitcoin data, but it is using data a little bit differently to how it's been used, in other things. So yeah, and I guess like when you start looking at it, it's one of those things when you're limited creatively, you've got to think creatively, and you often land up at a different endpoint. But that's kind of good. That's the process of going through creating something. It's finding your way through to how can I do this within these limitations. That's part of the challenge. And so I'm glad that I trusted my instinct a year ago and was like, oh, I want to do this, but it's not on chain and da da da. And we've had this evolution to now. But yeah, I think it's, Bitcoin is an exciting place to be creating art on. I really love it. I have an art practice, I do paint. Um, and I do like the physical and it's a different kind of process to creating with code art. But I love them both equally. I think they both. The thing I think I find more fascinating about working in this space is that we are the artists here creating the narrative for this art movement, and that's a very special moment in time, and I feel very lucky to be here.
Yeah, same massively. I remember the panel that I hosted in Miami. I think it was Leo Kayard behind Stones. He was on my panel and he was talking about the fact that art movements throughout history, they don't, well, like this is it's a bit of an obvious statement, but they don't just happen overnight. They're, it's like a 30 to 50 year thing. And that's why I would tell that 50-year story and also refer to that comment that he made. And you've been alluding to it. We are at this point in time where, sure, we get these floor price fluctuations and people can make Bitcoin and that's great, but it's not the whole. It's so far from the whole, or so far from, what in the, like, obviously we want, people love making money. That's it. We need to earn money to live.
I want people to make
but,
money.
But at the same time, it's like, they are shorter term metrics in terms of, like, there are different focuses, and like the butt flowers and other collections, it's going to be fascinating to see where they are, and it's impossible to say where they will be, but it's going to be fascinating to see where are they and where is Bitcoin art on Bitcoin in 30 to 50 years.
Yeah, look, I suspect the timeline will be shorter.
Do you think so? Do you think we get this different movement length?
Look, I do think my suspicion is that it's going to be like a 10-year cycle. It's not going to be short term, but it's not going to be that 50. I think the thing that we're not doing as a sector, I don't even know how you described us as a collective. I don't know what we are. We're not talking to enough people outside of our own echo chamber, and so we all have to try and build responsibilities. Let's think about what we can each do in that. For me, I was talking to the dev that I'm working with on the DMT kind of art project, the launch pad this morning, and I was saying to Max, I was saying, like, I can't believe, like, I went looking for writing on art on Bitcoin and none exists, like zilch, zero. So I was going to start a blog on that, and then I was like, I'm not going to start a blog. Who starts fucking blogs these days? I'll start a Substack. That's the thing at the moment. It's at least there. But I think we've got to start writing about.
We have it. We have blog.gamer.io that you can have a look at. But yeah, there needs to be more.
Yeah, so there needs to be more. But like, even in if you think of NFTs and ETH and like what landed up giving that movement such legs, where you had people like Art Gnome writing about it, and they're writing for art audiences. And so, like, how do we have those conversations? And I'm not doxxed, so I'm not public in talking about this or anything, but one thing and one of the reasons I decided to at least not have a voice and speak is because I kind of felt like there were so many opportunities that I was holding my back on talking. But I agree, like, when you speak to people about it, and there's a few friends, and my very close friends who kind of know I do it, they still don't quite understand it. But when you do speak to people, there is genuine interest and they do find it fascinating. So it's just, creating those opportunities, when we can. And, even generative art itself is still so niche. even though there's been so many collections and so many big, success stories there, it's all still very niche. But it is something that I think is going to have more and more awareness. Yeah, and like one of the reasons I decided on 10,000 for the Bitcoins too is like, well, it just gives more opportunity for us to tell the story about Bitcoin data. Like, you know, and you make a decision like, do I go a small collection and charge more, or do I go far and wide and charge less? And my feeling at the moment is far and wide and charge less is a way for us to onboard more people. So one of the things we are going to do with the Butt Flowers, obviously, is, we want all my previous communities will get access in some way, and we need to figure out that how. But also, we are going to try and get some ETH collectors across and build up, things from that, because they are kind of very unique even on Bitcoin. So, but we've got a narrative around like why this wouldn't exist on ETH, what makes it different, like, own something around Bitcoin that is Bitcoin. Is Bitcoin native. But I do really wish that, that integration that I think that I talked about you with early on, where people could use MetaMask to buy Bitcoin, they could pay in ETH. The babbies you could use ETH to buy on Bitcoin, I think was such a lost opportunity to give people the ability to basically convert their ETH to Bitcoin in a way that would have ridden the Bitcoin market even higher. And I think we would have got more cross pollination between ETH collectors and Bitcoin, which hasn't happened in huge numbers, unfortunately. A lot of that is because, they're protecting their bags, but, it's there's no reason why people shouldn't be collecting on both.
Yeah, for sure. Well, before we wrap up, you kind of referenced it there. Do you want to summarize the atomic Bitcoin butt flowers? You said we might see them on chain within a few weeks. I'm super excited. Like I said, as well, one of the introductions to us working together and doing it together on Gamma. When can we expect it, or roughly? I know you can never guarantee anything.
Oh, look, I've done that mistake before and said this, and then people hold you to it. So I like to have
Don't say a specific date.
lined up.
Yeah.
Look, we want to get them out in 3 or 4 weeks. They really are there. I just need to make sure I give myself enough time to test, as I said, the metadata. I have learnt not to worry about where market is or market narrative.
Yep.
We've got to collect, whitelist addresses as well. That's a big job. You know, and then share a little bit more about A.B.B.F. I know there's some people in my community who are just like, fucking when, you've been talking about these forever, King. And yes, I know. But I haven't really pushed the marketing on them and what makes them kind of so unique. And some of that has also been around, I had an idea about what I wanted to do, but then was it possible? Which is always a question when you're doing things no one else has done before. But I'm really excited to work with Gamma. And, I think one of the reasons I went with Gamma is I do really think they are the platform that has done the most to support artists. And, fundamentally, that is what I am and what I think we need to value more of. Magic Eden obviously is the big dominant player in the space, but they haven't treated artists particularly well. I'll be honest. There's no even way to search for art on Bitcoin on their platform. It's all about, bringing through new mints and continually highlighting the same freaking collections over and over again. So, I think that's important to me, and I want to support the people who supporting my people, which are, artists and people who collect art and believe in supporting those folks. So thanks for the opportunity.
No, we'll really appreciate the kind words. That is what we do and what we're going to continue to strive to do, and really looking forward to rolling out our new app as well, because it's just going to further reinforce that. So yeah, it's an honor to work
So
with
when's
you.
that coming, Brett, since you're asking me?
So that's a good question. Well, it's live in beta. So if you check out beta.gamma.io, but it's not like, you know, it's not in its entirety yet. So we're still, I suppose, mainly using gamma.io, but I don't want to put pressure on the devs. Just like, you know, you can never get, if you put an ETA on an engineer, that's a little bit of an unfair thing to do. One thing which, you know, and you would have seen on our main site, then if you check out our beta site, oh, I just got some feedback as well, is that we don't ship unless it's like 10 out of 10. Like, we want it to have the UI and the UX to be like excellent for the creator and for the collector. And so we'll make sure that it's like that before it goes live. Excited for that. But like I said, you know, appreciate that kind feedback. It was a pleasure to meet you here. I'm sure we'll grab another coffee, and yeah, it'll be an honor to work with you for this. And as you said, we're here for creators and collectors. So I think that it aligns really well. So on that note, thanks so much for spending the time. We're both hanging out on our Friday mornings. So thank you so much to everyone who tuned in around the world. It might be late your night, or I don't know, your afternoon. It's the 24/7 space. But yeah, King, have a wonderful day, and thanks for sharing.
Awesome. Thanks, Brett. Thanks,
Have a
everyone.
beautiful day.
Bye.